Hey everybody, TacticAngel here, back on the PlayStation 4 to take a look at another premium ship in World Warships Legends. This time we'll be reviewing the Tier 7 Italian battleship Roma. With this review I'll be starting out with history, then we'll move into analysis, run down the stats, I'll talk a little bit about my commander choice, and then we'll jump into some gameplay. If you want to skip around, I should have the chapters set up for this video, and you can find the time codes down in the description. The Roma was the third Littorio-class battleship to be built, and though a fourth ship was launched, it was never completed, making the Roma the final ship in the series. The Littorio class would be the only class of Italian battleships built after World War I. Confined to a battleship fleet of just 70,000 tons, the Italians had to consider what they wanted to do, whether it was to build 2 full-sized battleships, or if they wanted to go with 3 slightly smaller battleships. So several designs were ultimately considered during this period of time, though none were initially started. You see, the French and the Italians were both pretty happy not to build any battleships, so long as the other did not, being that they were 2 major powers in the Mediterranean. And this stalemate in battleship design lasted until 1932, when the French became so unnerved by the German Deutschland-class Panzerschiffen, Graspe being the member of the class that we have in-game, that they began work on the Dunkirk class of battleships with the goal of specifically being able to defeat them, and that led the Italians to consider actually building a battleship for the first time in 20 years. Though much is made about the German and Japanese ignoring treaty limits, both did so incrementally over a period of time. When the Italians introduced the Littorio, it really did blow the treaty restrictions right out of the water, coming in at 46,000 tons rather than the allowed 35,000. The Littorio ships had very long-range guns, though they were exceptionally inaccurate due mostly to poor quality control for their munitions, more than the guns themselves. The ships had a unique torpedo defense system, which involved a liquid-filled space within the ship with a hollow cylinder within. The idea being that when a torpedo hit the outer hull, and transferred its energy inward, it would collapse this cylinder, greatly reducing the energy that would be transferred into the vital parts of the ship. This system is called the Pugliese system after its inventor. Though creative, the system ate up quite a lot of space inside the ship and was therefore somewhat inefficient, and is described in various sources with colorful language, but I think it is safe to say that it was somewhat less effective than its designers had hoped it would be. Roma would be the third ship of the Littorio class, laid down in September 1938, its namesake being the capital of Italy that we English speakers call Rome. She would be launched in June 1940 and completed 2 years later in June 1942. Unfortunately, the reason I'm talking so much about the design of this ship is because the Roma's service history is relatively short and uneventful before it becomes suddenly quite tragic. And in an effort to distract you further from this, I will mention that the portrayal of this ship in game, namely this handsome camouflage and attractively designed model, is really another great example of Wargaming's art department doing a fine job rendering a historic ship. As for the service history of the Roma, by the time that Roma came into service, the Italians had already figured out that they hadn't quite figured out naval warfare in the mid-20th century, having suffered a series of somewhat embarrassing naval engagements, and adding to their reticence to take to sea against the Royal Navy again was the fact that they lacked sufficient fuel to actually do a lot of meaningful war making. Upon entering service, the Roma did have an initial training cruise and shakedown, as you would expect, before joining her sister ships the Littorio and Vittorio Veneto, as they sailed to Naples. There they endured Allied air raids intent on trying to destroy the Regia Marina. Though none of the battleships took significant damage here, that would pretty much round out the adventures of the Roma in 1942. The ships then headed for La Spezia, where they would enjoy a similar sort of aerial greeting as they had in Naples, with air raids in April of 1943. The Americans would return again on June 5th with a B-17 raid this time that damaged the Roma with several near misses, as well as a direct hit that passed clear through the ship, causing her to take on around 2,400 tons of water. She'd be damaged again during an air attack on June 23rd. This time hit 2 more times, once near the rear turret, destroying several staterooms, and another directly atop the rear turret, which had enough armor to weather the blast. Though the damage was not serious, the Roma would return to Genoa for repairs, though she was back in La Spezia by mid-August. On September 8th of that year, the Italian fleet was preparing to set sail for Salerno to engage the Allied ships there poised to invade Italy as part of Operation Avalanche, when they learned of the Italian armistice. Needless to say, the operation to repel the Allies was no longer really needed, since there was no longer a war as far as Italy was concerned. Instead, the fleet would try to sail for La Maddalena, but the port had already fallen to the Germans, who were very much still in the war. Then sailed for Bone instead. Rather than allowing the Italian ships to fall into Allied hands, the Luftwaffe launched an attack of Dornier Do-217s armed with Fritz X guided bombs. Though other ships were damaged in this attack, the Roma really did suffer the worst of it. First, with a Fritz X bomb passing directly through the ship and exploding beneath it. With her speed reduced, she began to fall out of formation, and the Roma would be struck a second time, this time landing a bomb in the forward engine compartment, causing fires within the ship that would detonate the forward magazine. The explosion threw the second turret clear of the ship, and the Roma would capsize shortly thereafter, break in two, and then sink to the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, around 19 miles north of Sardinia, taking with her nearly 1,400 of the 2,000 men aboard. In total, the Roma was in service for just about 15 months, traveled just under 2,500 miles, and never sortied into naval combat. Now, to be honest, when I saw that the Roma was going to be the campaign ship for this update, I wasn't very excited. The performance of the Regia Marina during World War II probably has something to do with it, but I was really hoping for a gunboat destroyer to come out, not just another 15-inch battleship. That said, it didn't take me very long to actually really start to enjoy the Roma. This probably comes as no surprise to anybody who's actually watched many of my videos before. I'm a pretty aggressive player, and I definitely love to brawl, and the Roma has everything you can hope for to be a pretty good brawler. Now, I say pretty good because, though you do have good torpedo defense, you should be wary of German cruisers and battleships at closer ranges, and I don't think the Roma is in any real danger of challenging those ships for their place in the pecking order. Where the Roma excels is she has good protection, good maneuverability, and really lovely turret traverse. Though she isn't gifted with her historical superior range in Legends, the truth of the matter is she can't hit anything at range anyway, so this does save you a little effort in trying. And this may be a good time to bring up that the Italians, at least as of the Roma's release, don't have an accuracy commander in Legends. You can either use the default commander, Capioni, or the battleship survivability commander, Di Revel. For those of you who are really into full dispersion builds, this might be a pretty significant turnoff, because you don't have a lot of choice in how you're going to play this ship, and you're going to have to get to medium range before those guns feel like they're going to do anything but disappoint you. Still, the ship is very agile, and certainly at close range the guns are pretty punchy. Having 15-inch guns on fast turrets, even if your rate of fire isn't incredible, is going to mean that you're able to respond to threats as they present themselves, as well as just about any battleship can in the game. That said, the Roma's turrets seem to be very susceptible to being disabled, along the same lines as the Odin, and that I'd say is really the one thing about the ship that I found truly frustrating. As we talk about stats, I'm going to actually talk about how the Roma plays versus the field. Though there are several 15-inch battleships out there, including what are actually considered brawlers, they all feel quite a bit more different than they feel similar to this ship, so I think it's just most fair to give you the feel versus the average that we have in game right now. So as we jump into survivability, I feel like these numbers aren't going to provide you the full picture on what makes the Roma a really good ship, and that it would be easier to explain this if there was actually an armor viewer in the game. So let me say this, the amount of hit points that the Roma has is pretty average. That's easy enough for me to wrap my head around, and this 380 millimeters of belt armor is definitely below average for a main belt, but the Roma is really hard to actually citadel. As far as I can tell from the Roma on PC, she has a decent outer belt, and if you maintain a good angle, you can bounce plenty of shots. And if you do get through that belt, it does look like there are 2 or maybe 3 layers of extra armor before the shells will actually get to the vital parts of your ship. So let me say this, I'm pleased with the survivability of this ship even if these numbers don't look all that good. But where the numbers do look good, your 38% torpedo reduction is 8% higher than average, and another 8% higher than the German ships I'd otherwise tell you are better brawlers. This can actually make a pretty considerable amount of difference in the amount of damage you'll take should you accidentally catch one of those metal fish when driving in close. The Roma sports 3x3 381mm guns, better known as 15-inch guns. This means most cruisers and battleships at Tier 7 are going to be able to bow tank you. Your main battery reaches out to 16.8 kilometers, which is very short-ranged, with the Monarch being the only battleship at Tier 7 that currently has a shorter range than that. Your reload and turret traverse are both 30 seconds. The reload is pretty average at Tier 7, though there are several 16-inch guns in there. 30 seconds is the joint longest for the caliber that we're talking about. Since you only have one real commander choice in this, you're probably actually never going to see the full 30 seconds though. The 30-second turret traverse, on the other hand, is tied for best in class at Tier 7, alongside the Odin, which is pretty good company considering it has much smaller guns, and the Vanguard, which you'd probably be pretty foolish or desperate to routinely drive as close to your enemies as you can safely in the Roma. The 2 other notes I'll make here is that the Roma has, hands down, the worst HE shells you'll find on a Tier 7 battleship. This 5100 damage is low, and the 24% fire chance is actually the lowest in class. Also, even though I'm talking about the Roma as a brawler, I wouldn't suggest running secondaries on this because your suite here has 2 things that aren't really great. First, the big guns you've got here are shooting AP, which means that they will hit pretty hard, but they have 2 things that are going to work against you. The computer aims for the main belt, and that's to the extent that you can claim that the computer aims at all. So, in the unlikely chance that you do hit, you'll probably bounce off of any decently angled target, and the other problem here is that there just aren't enough guns overall shooting fast enough to make this DPM an overall good idea. So Roma, try to keep on AP as much as possible, and lean into your main guns, rather than secondaries. Though I personally have been pretty happy with the speed of the Roma, at 30 knots she's actually exactly the average for battleships of the tier. That said, she does turn reasonably well at just 810 meters with a 15.6 second turning circle. That's better than average in both cases, and among Tier 7 battleships in the game right now, she's the 3rd most maneuverable behind the Odin and Alabama, which does pretty significantly play into her role as a brawler. Though the Roma is sort of stealthy as a battleship on the computer, there isn't much difference between the most stealthy and least stealthy ships at Tier 7 in Legends, unfortunately. But for what it's worth, the Roma is tied for the most stealthy alongside the Monarch. Your visibility from the air is also below average, and the detectability in smoke is pretty much what you'd expect for a battleship armed with 15-inch guns. When we look at consumables, the Roma is going to come with a repair party and a choice of planes. The repair party is your standard repair party, which repairs 1/2 of 1% per second for 28 seconds, with an 80-second reload. Also mounted on your rear quarterdeck, which is a really good looking place to put these catapult aircraft, you can either have a fighter or spotter aircraft. The fighter is your standard 90 seconds with 3-minute reload. It will orbit at a reasonably quick pace and help you spot ships and torpedoes, and maybe even engage aircraft in the future. You can switch this out for a spotter plane, which has a 30-second duration, moves at a glacial speed. I'm not actually sure a plane could fly that slow, so it really won't help you spot too much, but it will increase the accuracy of your main guns while it's active. If you're looking for my opinion on this, I continue to think that a fighter plane is a more attractive option for aggressive battleships who are going to be pushing caps and more likely to encounter torpedoes and smoke that they might want to be able to see over, while the spotter aircraft is really just a buff for 1 or 2 salvos with your main battery, and most useful when you're fighting at a distance. For my money, the Roma's solidly in the former category, and I can say I ran this most of the time with a fighter, because honestly you still can't hit anything even with a spotter. Before we jump into the game, I will put my commander here because really, there's just a couple things I want to hit on. We're going to be using D. Revel with exactly the configuration you see on screen. Brawler to discourage me from shooting at things I can't hit anyway, and helping my DPM against things that I actually can. Crisscross and Kedroff as an inspiration to get my turret traverse down to a speed that even most cruisers would be jealous of. Cunningham to help at least counteract the camo people will be wearing, and everything else to help with my survivability. Unfortunately, I lacked the personal orders to make all of my commanders competitive. As far as I could tell, Capione was going to be pretty meh, and the media kit hasn't been updated with the Italian commanders anyway, and I really didn't have time to Photoshop all of this on top of doing 2 reviews this week. So those are my excuses, I'm sorry. Now let's jump into some boats. And of course, we'll be on Two Brothers for our gameplay today. There you can see, I'm staring longingly at the map, but I am in the Roma, and there you can see it right there. I'm not sure how I feel about being on this map usually. And for the meantime, you can see I'm just kind of like staring off into the distance, seeing what my team is doing on this side. Usually this is not the most dynamic of maps. So, since it looks like everybody's fanning out wide to the east, I am going to go ahead and see if I can't give them at least a little bit of support. Ideally, I would want to try to sail up the east coast real close. That would give me the best chance of getting into a brawl easily, but it requires the enemy to be very accommodating if I want to do that safely. You can see I'm taking some long-range gunnery there. Just poorly aimed, but it was kind of a clutch shot to try to get that through the gap. Shooting at another Roma over there, and of course you can see an Iowa also sailing into the area. I don't quite get all of my shells through the gap, but we do manage to bounce a shell, do a little bit of damage with our AP. At this point, I am gonna fan out just a little bit further. I really don't want to be in a situation where I do a lot of long-range gunnery here, but at the same time, sailing out into the middle of that eastern side, or western side for that matter, is gonna mean that I'm probably gonna get focused down pretty quickly. Already have a little bit of fire coming in from a distance, and almost certainly it's going to be more accurate, if not longer range than what I can do. Unfortunately, I don't really watch that too much. You can see a little bit there when I use my shell follow view. That is on preset number 1 and 2. I use preset 2 because I do things a little bit differently here. Firing at a destroyer at this range is, I guess you just kind of sit here and you hope and you wait and whatever. I'm not really surprised when nothing happens. But while we're wasting some time at the beginning of this game, I will point out, since we're looking right at the forward deck of the Roma, that there are historic reasons why the front deck is painted with red and white stripes. It has largely to do with being able to identify the ship from the air. I have also left a link down in the description to a pretty good article that Wargaming put out on World of Warships PC that explains all about it. In any case, it does make the ships kind of interesting in their appearance. Now you may be wondering why I'm staring so long at that Wichita. Essentially, I needed to get around so that I knew it would be in range when my shells finally got there. If he kept sailing away from me and I was sailing away from him, then I probably would just waste my shot. And clearly with the damage we walked away with, our patience was definitely rewarded there. But aside from the fact that some of these salvos are not particularly well aimed, you can see that when we do put a good set of shots out there on the Wichita, the shots are a bit squirrely in terms of where they all go. That certainly could have come from a German battleship or pretty much anything. Not super good. We are reacting to the shot actively there, turning out. I believe that we have 32 millimeters on the bow of this, so if we get to the right angle, we do have a chance of actually bouncing that. With our quick reload, thanks to Brawler, we do land a shell in there on the Iowa and manage to disable one of his turrets. I'm not liking the enemy push over here, and I also see there's somebody going through the middle, it looks like. So I'm happy to meet him. I will mention that is the one time that I've ever citadelled a Roma, or at least during this week. It is a pretty tough task to do. Now I do expect the Wichita to come into this gap. That's actually not super great for me because the Wichita does have enough armor that he would be able to bow tank me. And I don't have enough HE damage to really make it so that he would really pay for that decision. So I'd be counting on being able to drive up beside him without him seeing, hey, it's TacticAngel, I need to ram him. Not that that's ever happened. So this is probably a reason why I would ordinarily not choose to display this particular replay, because I don't want you to get the idea that going through the middle is a good idea. It's almost certainly not. In fact, I sometimes ask my division mate, Mark aka White, who is a German community contributor, "Wollen Sie durch die Mitte gehen?" And he will say one of two things. He'll say, "No," which means you're being an idiot. Or he'll say, "Nein," which means no. Pretty much the same as the first option. In any case, we are making our way through the middle, and you can see, of course, we're coming out in view of a Yamato. Now, the Yamato is not paying attention to us, which is one reason why we are going to get our back turret into play here. I do feel pretty good about bow tanking a Yamato. I've done it once. I feel like that's proof that it works. It couldn't possibly have been that the guy got bad dispersion, right? In any case, our first set of shells were aimed a little high. I usually forget how high the Citadel is in that. Second set, we put right about at the waterline. So you can see these shells do have the ability to be quite punchy. Unfortunately, when a ship like this, the Wichita, drives out exactly like this, we put those shells waterline. We sail a couple of them because of our incredible dispersion. But as you would expect, most of the shells go straight through. This is actually one reason why I don't particularly want to use Artisan's Touch. Not the least of which is that it seems to say something weird about Artisans, because for the most part it seems like the "you're going to overpenetrate cruisers" perk. So what I'm doing right now is trying to drive up on him to either force him to turn in or turn out. He doesn't really have the option to stay exactly as he is. Unfortunately, while I'm doing that, I do take a big hit from the side, Unfortunately, in getting a better angle on that Wichita, which I needed to do in order to get him to give me an angle where I could punish him, I did open myself up to a little bit of extra damage from this Roma, and if we look even further to the left, I believe that is the Iowa still paying a little bit of attention to me. Now we've been shaved down to just 6,000 health if we round up. And we're really, really hoping to live long enough to get our next heal off. We do, and you can kind of see me looking around here because obviously with the update we have the changes to the legendary perks, and I'm a little bit interested to see if the guy who's behind me is going to sail within 1.5 kilometers of me. I suppose you could say one or the other, or both of us, have made it so that I've just managed not to do that. But even though I was kind of trying to ask him to help me out there, we're now within that range, and really probably the best way to do this with the blues is to make sure that you drive inside of their 1.5 kilometers. So now I'm coming around on this Iowa. I will bounce every shot off the side of him, so I aim a little bit high. We do manage to come away with just about 5,000 damage, which isn't great, but it's not nothing. There you can see one of my turrets being disabled. That isn't the first time it's happened in this game, and I think usually about 2 times is pretty average. I've had it happen 4 or 5 times. I haven't actually lost any turrets, so that's nice. That's probably also just luck. But you can see that legendary ship, the Alaska, in front of us, does manage to finish off the Iowa. I am burning, but while I am in range of the Alaska, it is immediately being healed, so I'm not too worried about that right now. I could heal above that, but I don't really need to at this point. It doesn't look like I'm taking enough sustained damage to actually outpace that heal. I'll be real interested to see what everyone's experience with this infinite heal is, because to me it seems like it is exploitable. You can see that Odin has hit us a few times. He looks like he's probably a little far away. So my lack of reaction there you might attribute to skill, clearly. But now we're in the long-range gunnery business again. I guess this is kind of medium range, and he's trying to run away. I think he's going to hit this island, so I'm just going to give him that opportunity. That allows me the best chance of actually hitting something, not because I get better dispersion on a stationary target, but because I simply know exactly what direction a stationary target is moving. I'm pretty sure it's going to happen again here, so I'm just waiting to take my next shot, but it looks like he's actually going to clear it. Other people were a little bit more confident in their shot, managed to finish off the Odin, and we finish out the game. So, essential takeaways from this Roma gameplay. Long-range gunnery, not really a strong suit for the Roma. If you get in close, you can do a lot of damage and actually land a lot of shots. The guns are pretty troll in terms of their accuracy, so being close is definitely helpful. You've got good speed, and you've seen this thing bounce all sorts of shots. And I don't want to let this review get away from me without me saying something about the turret traverse, because Though I didn't say it during the gameplay, you might have noticed it was around 22 seconds for 180 degrees. That's pretty darn good. Roma, I like it a lot. I like brawlers though. If you're one of the people who are going to look at this and think, I really want another sniper battleship, this is not really going to be your speed. I feel like she's pretty forgiving, but I think she's a lot of fun. In any case, I hope you've all enjoyed this little review. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.